Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Building Week. My name is Carl Brown. I'm the head of content at Assemble Media Group, and I'm chairing this discussion today, which is all about navigating Building Safety Act compliance through digital delivery. The requirements of the Building Safety Act are beginning to feel very real now for all of us. Not least the requirements to create, hold, and maintain a golden thread of information. Basically a digital record to ensure the right people have the right information at the right time throughout the life cycle of a building. This discussion is going to look at that, but it's also going to look at the transformative potential of digital strategies in helping the industry to meet compliance and requirements more generally under the Building Safety Act. And we will hear how various digital tools can streamline general compliance efforts, enhance transparency, and ensure safer buildings. I've got two panelists to introduce to you. So we have Jan Stevens, who's the BIM manager at the Hill Group, and we have René van Zwijndrecht, who is the head of digital delivery at Radcliffe's Construction Consultants. Each of our panelists will speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go into a Q&A at the end. And please get involved. You can ask a question at any time. If you look at the bar on the side of your screen, you should be able to see the questions box. Pop your question in there at any time, and I'll try and get to as many of them as I can during the Q&A. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Jan from the Hill Group. Jan, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Just going to get my screen to share. Hold on. For some reason, it keeps moving the screen I want to share. There we go. Okay. Hopefully that has popped up and everyone can see my screen. I suppose, Carl, you let me know if that's not the case. Okay, so I suppose as a quick introduction, so my name's, like I said, Jan Stevens. I've worked at Hill for around 18 months, and my role is Group BIM Manager. And as part of that, I look at implementation of sort of standards and processes to try and streamline and improve the way we deliver projects. But I suppose not just projects, but the way we kind of deliver or report on our information as a group as well. Over the last 18 months, really, since I've joined, we've been jointly, myself and the head of quality, Andy, have been looking at the Building Safety Act and the impact that might have on us as an organisation and how we sort of operate. And as a result, mostly, in fact, nearly all largely led by Andy, he's created a guidance document that we're circulating around our business to, I suppose, try and decipher the large amount of paperwork that exists and try and just pull that into a more sort of summarized version that we've sent out to our sort of staff so that they understand the impact that's coming, because I suppose not everybody is going to have the time or the inclination to read up on it. So as part of that, I think we tried to kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily get ahead of the game, but try and implement a bit of a culture change is I suppose the first thing. So we actually tried to implement, or I say tried, we have implemented a change control plan from last year, although as new regulations come out, we've kind of tried to improve on that. But I suppose for today, what I'm going to cover is kind of the 4 bullet points that were mentioned in the kind of brief, and just run through, I suppose, a bit around what we may be trying to do, where we're trying to head, and I suppose one of the things to mention is it's kind of an evolving door, or an evolving sort of roadmap that will improve as time goes by. I don't know how much people know about the gateways, but I'll probably just summarise them really, really briefly. Into Gateway 1 is a planning submission assessment of a fire statement. So you can't, basically, the idea is that you can't really submit a plan application without having done a check that it will meet fire safety regulations. So whereas traditionally you could kind of submit whatever you wanted, this is trying to put a bit of due diligence in that design to make sure it's compliant. Gateway 2, I suppose I tend to summarize it as really as it's kind of a planning stage. So before you build, you plan how you're going to manage the information, how you're going to develop, or how you're going to track your changes, how you're going to manage build quality to make sure you're compliant, as well as your traditional building control submission, where you submit your drawings and your plans and your sort of the way the way the design works. So as I suppose what they're asking for now is a complementary document called a building regulation compliance statement, which talks you through how you're meeting the functional requirements of the building regulations. So really I suppose it's a more a defined set of requirements that hopefully are things you kind of manage already, but in a more like I say, defined, detailed way. So you can't sort of ad hoc change stuff. There needs to be a kind of robust procedure that sits behind that you've detailed at Gateway 2. And then Gateway 3, I suppose from my point of view, I think Gateway 3 starts at Gateway 2 submission, because from that point onwards, you need to start gathering the evidence and follow those plans that were submitted. So for instance, change control kicks in as soon as Gateway 2 is submitted, and likewise with your construction control plan, which talks around how you're going to manage build quality, your mandatory occurrence reporting, which talks about any breach of either design or construction that could result to fire or structural safety issues. So almost immediately you're starting Gateway 3. This is your evidence log, and everything needs to be kept kind of up to date as you go along. So to talk about the power of digital, I thought rather than necessarily cover it in specifics to Building Safety Act, I think digital has got the power to impact in every aspect of any business really, and it's that strategy and harnessing it that will really improve the ability to deliver Building Safety Act information. And really to do that, there needs to be a kind of a digital strategy, and that kind of sets the foundations. So it's a bit like when you're trying to create a track or a report. If you don't think about that end result, you're not going to get the answers you want. You kind of have to start with the end in mind, and that's that foundation that you then put in place. So rather than, I suppose, reinvent the wheel and kind of come up with my own diagrams and analogies, I'm kind of going to draw upon something called the Gemini Principles, which is something produced by Centre for Digital Build Britain, which I think sort of quite succinctly in this image on the right hand side of the screen details how digital can be sort of leveraged and used. And basically it's a value chain. So as you go higher up this sort of pyramid, the data becomes more valuable. So at the bottom end of the scale, we've got things like sensors and CCTV, images, drawings, documents, and all of those taken in isolation are somewhat useful, but not necessarily you're not necessarily going to get much out of it. It's when you start to cleanse, categorize, group, and manage that information that you can then move further up the tree and start to make sense of that. So this is where you can do your analytics. You can then try and mine the information to get the answers you want. And then once you've kind of got that sort of grouped and analyzed, you can then start to make better decisions. So you can quickly assess where things are going to go wrong and how things can be improved. And this could be applied at any level, but also to the Building Safety Act. So if you've planned how you're going to collate and how you're going to manage the information, the idea is that you can then bring that together and then track it in a reporting style, which then you track and then you track, and that might then bring about risks. and how you manage that risk that you didn't get the right information at the right point of time. So I suppose from my point of view, and I tend to relate all this back to BIM, which is, I suppose, predominantly people would see it as building information modeling. Sometimes I like to call it building information management because it's generally about managing information. Some people say better information management, but it's always about how we manage information, basically. And if we do a better job on it, we can make better decisions because we can understand what's going on. We can kind of preemptively get our early warnings in because we're doing that analytics as we go along, and we can kind of see trends and things like that, which we can take directly off our trackers. And the it all really depending on exactly how you set it up, it basically gives you a lot more certainty around what you're doing, from either compliance or whether you're kind of sticking your finger in the air and kind of guessing at answers. You've got that, I suppose you've got that confidence in the information you've been given. And increasingly, I suppose big data and things like that are looking at live information there and then. An easy one is something like when you put on maps and you get directions to go somewhere, it's typically tracking everything live now, and that's just taking and compiling lots and lots of data to provide that kind of analytics for you. So then there's a transition from paper, as everything for the Building Safety Act should be in a digital format. And I think the concern here is that the power of digital isn't really to transition from paper. So you can't, or you shouldn't just take a form and just copy it and put it on electronic format, because you're not really harnessing the power of the sort of digital and the data that you might have. The idea is to really build a kind of a system whereby you only enter information in once, you reduce the amount of duplication, and you kind of have efficiency. So I suppose in a predominantly paper-based process, or even if you're just copying if you're transitioning from paper to electronic, and you're just doing literally a mirror image, an identical copy, you're kind of looking at the left-hand side of this image where everything needs to be entered in multiple times. It all needs to talk to, I say it doesn't really talk to each other. You kind of have to manually sort of, those connecting dots could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be it's just saved somewhere on the system, it could be entering data in again and again and again. So for instance, if you collect forms and you're constantly putting in the project name, which you'd normally write, this is, I suppose, saying, well, actually, if we think about our transition from paper to digital, should we share the information, store it centrally, and then resurface that information when we need it? So for me, if you are going to transition, think about how you're going to store and be able to mine and combine that information together. And I think as part of that, you really need to, there's like a hierarchy of information, and what you don't want to do is keep entering data in many times. So by joining the dots together of the hierarchy, you can kind of enter in the site information once, and by associating it to a project, a building level, perhaps a plot, and then by room, you can already associate anything at site level directly to a room and further down. And to be honest, the image on the right is pretty much a COBie spreadsheet, which, if people have heard of, is basically a standardized asset register format. So the idea is that you could, the idea of COBie is a way of transferring information from any particular contractor or designer, I guess, up to a client, so that they can import into an FM system. So pretty much COBie is designed for FM and facility management, and it just can't. But by adopting, or I suppose I would encourage people to adopt that as a standard, because it should be consistent. You'll get the same output no matter who you're working with, and you can kind of plan ahead, like you know what the format is, you know what that's going to look like, you know how that's should be delivered. So I think that would be what I would say for if you are going to transition, which I think the Building Safety Act is kind of pushing us to kind of lead the charge. I think one of the things that they've said all along is that they want the industry to lead the Building Safety Act in terms of its development. It's not for them, and this is why I think they're quite hesitant to give us sort of templates and things like that, is that they want us to push the boundaries of what good looks like, and then from that maybe they'll decipher some sort of standard or best practice. So leading on to the golden thread, I suppose the golden thread is a record of everything, and it needs to be up to date, it needs to be accurate, which I suppose lends itself to having a version control system. So you should, when we talk about accurate and up to date, firstly you need to make sure changes are implemented immediately, and we're updating drawings and we're updating information as we go, rather than waiting traditionally until the very end of the project to do that. I think that's quite a common sort of approach. And then up to date for me also means not having multiple versions of a document sat there and you're not sure which one is the most up to date. Also removing duplicates, things like that. You don't want to have duplicate versions of a drawing in different areas. It's kind of that single source of truth. Where is all this information stored? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you need one set system. You could have an FM system, and then you could have a document management system, but you shouldn't have, there shouldn't really be a crossover. What's in the FM system should be in the FM system, and what's in the document management system sits in there, and they kind of, you know where to go for each if you want to find the latest information. Obviously, other parts of the golden thread, I don't know that the level of knowledge that people have got around this on the call, but it also needs to be secure. So a system with passwords, logins, so that permissions are controlled, accessible, so it's available to people at the right time. So can you add people, remove people, give them the right access to the information they need, and transferable. So can it go from one system to another is, I suppose, a thing for me. So that's where I like that Kobe delivery, because you can take data and transfer it. And when it comes to understandable and consistent, I think there's things that we could do to try and make life easier for ourselves. I'll probably run on to a few of those things a little bit later on. So again, another, I suppose, copy of someone of a, I think it was a government document. This image on the right hand side comes from, but really it's and I think this at this point I'm talking more of a client side rather than the main contracting side, which I'm more accustomed to. But the idea, I think, is that clients should be storing their data centrally and having their own kind of common data environments where they store and manage their information from, and that's where this kind of CDE should be implemented. So as a client, the idea is that you need to have everything available, and us as a contractor, we would then pass that on to you upon completion. And then from there, if you recall back to the previous slides where you have that data store and you're going in and out, that's where you'd sort of run data connections to other systems and platforms you might use. So for instance, if you've got an FM system, maybe you want to bring that information back to your central data store. Anything that any sort of analytics you might run against your buildings, like, I don't know, footfall going past buildings. I know retail centres do that type of stuff. You could obviously, rather than store it on their system, the idea is that you bring it back to your own system, and you've got that central store of information. So, and then I think for the golden thread, things that I suppose I would really kind of push or point towards, I suppose, is the ISO 19650 and some of the BIM standards. So to make things, or to make your information consistent and understandable, I think from the outset, I would say the first thing is to look at document naming and file naming structures. So if you put in the ISO 19650, there's a UK annex for document naming that then ensures that when you're reading a document, it's laid out in a consistent, the document name's a consistent format that is understandable. So before you even open that drawing or that document to see what's actually on it, you should have a bit of a gauge as to what project even relates to. If you're managing many projects, what block it might relate to, what level, and then, like I say, it's immediately, without actually going into a drawing, it's immediately more understandable. Other things for me are things like putting codes in. So status codes, how should that drawing and that information be read? And those status codes, again, are part of the ISO 19650. And they kind of tell you whether a drawing is complete, it's still being worked on. What stage was it complete for? Was it a construction drawing? Was it an as-built? Was it a stage 3 planning drawing? So all of that helps make everything understandable, and it kind of puts in place a kind of structure, I suppose, for your golden thread. So I definitely think BIM forms a good guide as to how to lay out that golden thread. And then I suppose case studies, I suppose loosely, these are case studies, I suppose. So from our point of view, obviously the Building Safety Act is really only just sort of coming into force, but as a result, I suppose preemptively, we've kind of come up with our own sort of template, I guess, for managing the building regulation compliance statement. So what we're aiming to do is kind of do one page. What we'd like to do is one pages for kind of wayfinding. Or summarization of how we're achieving each part of the building regulations. So we'll take each part and each section of the which is a functional requirement, detail out what we're doing and why we think that complies, and why and if there's any relevant documentation or standards that relate to that. The reason for that is that rather than submitting 1,000 documents as part of building regulation, our building control submission, what we're going to aim to do is kind of point them in the right direction straight away as to what we've done and why we've done it, and then supplement that with a drawing register. There's kind of a matrix of drawings and functional requirements to say, yes, we've submitted 1,000 drawings, but to be honest, for A1, you only really need to look at these 15 or these 10. And that way, we're kind of hopefully going to get to a quicker answer before during that submission period. This one's not necessarily to do with Building Safety Act, but I think it does lend itself to helping towards that. And that's things like creating document trackers. So the idea is if you've got a data store and you kind of connecting dots, you can kind of make life easier. So by creating a scope or a set of deliverables, creating your program for design, or it could even be for as-built or any stage. When's that information need to be delivered by? And then if we can get our consultants to deliver an issue sheet to tell us what drawings are going to be delivered against what's deliverable. So let's say we've got a set of general arrangements. We want 10 general arrangements. These are the document numbers. We can then link the program to the drawings we're going to expect to receive. And then we can link that back to your CDE. So as that drawing gets onto the system, we're looking out for the drawing number to make sure it relates, which means we can track back to the date, and then we can kind of create a dashboard that tells you where and what that design is looking like. And then on this left-hand side, we've got a kind of handover tracker. So this is the idea is that we're going to try and track certificates. So on the left-hand side, you'll have your plots or your postal addresses. Along the top, we'd have what certificate we're expecting to see. And then if people follow a document naming structure, we should be able to get these X's to appear in the right space for when we've got the right documents appearing in our CDE. So there's a few things there that gives us that, I suppose, that comfort that things are progressing at the way we want. And then I suppose last slide from me is really, I think we're guilty of putting too much information on drawings sometimes, and so these are things to try and, in my opinion, for the Building Safety Act, to try and reduce, to try and make it more understandable and less subject to change control. We should probably scale back what we think is relevant to a drawing, and maybe think, do I need that on that drawing, or is it actually on another drawing for a better purpose? So for me, I don't necessarily, and opinions vary, so this is subjective, but for me, I don't necessarily think on a GA you need to have loose furniture, so tables and chairs and things like that on the plan, because you'll look at the flat type layout or the apartment layout for that, and then that way, if we do make a change to the way the furniture and then subsequently all the electrical or mechanical systems are put in, we're not having to update lots and lots of drawings, because it was never on those, like some of that information was never on the drawing anyway, because it wasn't for that purpose. For me as well, I'm trying to suggest not to put manufacturers directly on drawings, because let's say we've got lighting drawings, you've got 30 lighting drawings and the manufacturer's on there, and for some reason you want to change one, you've then got to update 30 drawings. If we put a reference to say it's light type XE1, so it's light type X, it's an emergency light, then what you could do is just have a library of products, and you could say on the drawing it's still that light type XE1, and we're only updating the data sheet, so actually the drawing stays consistent. There's no change there, and also that lends itself as well to when you're in the sort of in use as built phase, where you'll actually also have the same issue where potentially you'd have to update a load of drawings because you've changed products around, and actually should that really live on lots and lots of drawings? And then, as I've sort of mentioned in the previous slides around COBie and standard transfer of information, and not understanding, but using REBA stages and status codes to a better degree, I think will also make information much clearer to kind of understand. So it's probably a bit of a mixture of digital and Building Safety Act, but that's my kind of slides for now. I don't know how long I've taken there, but hopefully I'm within the 15 minutes.
Thanks, Jan. That was great. It's a really useful reminder there of some of the provisions of the Building Safety Act, along with lots of useful insight about the information value chain, golden thread, and other kind of other things we have to do as part of this culture change, I suppose. I'm now going to move on to our next panelist, who's Rene from Radcliffe's Construction Consultants. Rene, over to you.
Hi, everyone. All right, I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, so just do a little bit of introduction. So Radcliffe's is predominantly construction consultants from a project management background. However, we realized that we help deliver buildings to a great standard and on time and all that. But what happens to all of that wonderful information afterwards? So I've been brought in to build the BIM and information management leg of the business, to make sure that all of that information is properly structured and can be used. So I've spent quite a few months exploring and investigating the operation sides of buildings and portfolios, which then led me to the Building Safety Act, which is really it ties really nicely into all of our BIM methodologies. And what I realized is that the operations side of buildings is very chaotic sometimes, and there's so many parties involved. So I think we've kind of we're busy resolving how we build our buildings and how we use BIM and information management, but how does that tie in afterwards? So I'm going to use the 4 themes of this talk. All right, so the power of digital in the context. So again, our approach to the Building Safety Act has been from a strategic level, including how we're going to project manage this process, and then how are we going to put together the right digital strategy so that not only we can capture this information, but how can we maintain it, and how's this building going to run, with this information. So I've investigated many platforms, and to be honest, I don't think there's one solution that solves this. You might have to use multiple platforms. I've looked at, there's different approaches, from the 360 photos to digital twin approaches to simple as a Dropbox. I've seen reports that are, it's basically a nice Word document. And that's great, but it is, we really need to look in how this platform that will be used tie into potentially. So we've got clients with existing portfolios and buildings. How does it tie into the existing technology tree? I believe ultimately the key for this is this central hub or lens, where you use, or where you can control and manage information. So again, you'll have operation information coming in as long, while the building's continuing. You might have, at times you might have construction happening, and that will loop into construction process and then come back. But you need one central point. It doesn't have to be that the information, I think Jan refer to that. It could be in different places, it could be different platforms. So let's say the operations work on theirs, they understand their platform, but it needs to go into one control point, or let's call it a dashboard. The bigger picture. So we've from the project management side approached this as well. It's not just plonking a new platform in that's going to be managed. We really looked into the total structure of the technology being used, or potentially will be used. So it's how we're going to put something in place for this digital strategy, but it can plug in. Absolutely, BIM and information management is key. So you cannot implement this without overall strategy of naming your revisions, how you're going to change control. You absolutely need that, and that's the start. And then plan for the unexpected. I mean, this building will last for decades. There'll be changes in staff, there will be changes in technology. So you need to put something in place that can be transferred over, moved over, and you don't have to start from scratch. So again, just a proper naming strategy and a structure will help. That could be transferred to new staff, new programs, and in the future. So just think about that, because a lot of the strategies I see is we're going to put a report together and people walk away, and then it will be crisis mode again when a new report is needed. So transitioning from paper, I mean, we absolutely have encountered projects where there is literally just paper that needs to be scanned, or multiple Excels, or some site person's little notebook. That's the reality. So we've been working with a kind of stepped approach. So first of all, let's gather what's available. Let's gather that notebook. Let's scan all of those paper copies, and then see what you have. We can take that then and create a structure. So say, well, listen, this is grouped together. This is related to fire, all of that. And then you can start planning how you're gonna update this information, because a lot of that paper information is not the latest layouts necessarily. It's missing information. So it's first just really seeing what's missing, and typically what we found, it highlights owners of information. There's a lot of misunderstanding of who's responsible for what. And once you've got that, you can start grouping information. You could potentially add metadata, and metadata really becomes this, let's call it a chip that you put in. So let's say your platform is not being used and everything is dumped in one place. At least there's something that you could connect it to a relevant section of the building safety case. And then very important is control of this information. What happens when a new fire strategy is being put together? You need to put a trigger mechanism in place and steps, so that at any point a stranger can look at that and really understand what's happening with that information. So, right, this is just a little diagram that we've put together in one of our projects, and this project is quite interesting. It is existing works happening. There is existing phases that are finished, multiple parties involved, so it's really quite complex. So it's you've got literally the paper copies. You have people don't know who's responsible or accountable. We currently running the new the construction with a digital twin platform, and it's all running according to naming protocols. However, the existing parts, there's a whole team looking at that, and they've started saving it on another platform and naming it the way they used to. So it's really looking at all of that, bringing it back together. How do we start linking it? This, what's the future of this? Because there's going to be information that will not be available now, so it will be only later on. And then slowly but surely it starts, grouping together, and it runs through a central hub. Regulations is another thing. You've got to understand what was relevant, what is not relevant. At some point it becomes summary of that. So there's quite a lot going on there. All right, so navigating the golden thread. Yeah, absolutely. We work on projects that are existing portfolios. We are working on projects that are following a BIM process. Really, for me, the Safety Act is really starting to ask us, what is your current, draw a line, what is your current golden truth? And that's what we're trying to do. And then you take it from there, because, literally a week later, since you've handed a building over, things change. The traceability and the structured, because, you need to be able to trace things back. You need to have a structure behind it that can be understood. And I think this Building Safety Act is really starting to help us with creating a kind of example of what is relevant to a golden thread, because the golden thread's been mentioned, but giving us a little bit of a kind of bandwidth to use. That's great. So I think this is a really good thing, and it's something to remember. It's not just the golden thread is basically infinite. It's in flux. A building doesn't stay the same. There's a lot of things happening within that. So ultimately, this golden thread branches out into strands of activities and information that will come back, and then into the thread, the golden thread. It's just a little example of let's say you've got an object like a sprinkler. there's all of these bits of information that connects. There's actions along the way. Once you've submitted your report, you know, something down the line might happen. So let's say a new sprinkler system is being brought in, and you have to issue your report. It's going to be interesting to see how people manage that. So your report will have to have a way to say, well, listen, our report is up to date with this, and work in progress is this element in that. So, you know, keeping that in mind will be interesting. And then case study. So we've got a few projects going. One of the more interesting ones is this big development with phased work. There's phases that are finished. There's current work, and then future phases for the next few years. We've put together. So our approach is we're not fire specialists, we're not structure specialists. So we put together a consortium of the right people. So we've partnered up with different consultants, we've partnered up with lawyers, we've partnered up with different platforms, and then basically, you know, after analyzing what's the current state of information, we put together a strategy that of who's the team needed, you know, and how we're going to approach it, and we manage this project. But it doesn't stop there. We look into how, after we've handed over this, how do we make sure that this runs continuously, and how easy is it to update information. So we built in check-ins. So you know, let's say once a year, or a few months, we check in and see, because inevitably you'll have lessons learned and all of that. So so we built in our pack maintenance plan. So it will show you know, what information it needs more regular checks. We, for instance, we asked the consultants to include a pre-built list of actions that needs to be taken. So let's say your fire door checks, and in this case, we, for instance, we're using a digital twin platform that we can pre built in actions and tickets and steps. And I think the key about that type of thing is it's not someone just changing a piece of information and it doesn't, you know, and nobody knows about it. You have to actively, through this lens, trigger something, or something will pop up and say, well, listen, by the way, you do to do this. And someone's going to actually say, I'm now going to do this. And at the end, it's going to be ticked, it's been done. And that will give you control over it. So let's say the principal accountable person will only have to go into a dashboard and see, you know what, I see someone is busy with this section of work, or something's been changed in another section of work. So I think this, for instance, one of our fire consultants is working on a platform that purely for the fire items. So they would, for instance, link that to the safety case information. And let's say there's a regulation change. This will pop up and say, hey, by the way, there's a regulation change, and your strategy, because it's been put together this way, might affect a certain part of it. So yeah, so again, so future proofing this, I think there's going to be, you know, this is a growing field and a growing challenge. But I think what we're trying to build in is, first of all, just have a proper information structure so that information can go wherever it needs to be, could be understood. But then just be proactive about putting things in place so that we don't go back to someone quickly doing an Excel file or a little hand sketch or or a notebook thing. So there's some exciting stuff, and yeah, that's really the summary of our approach.
Thank you, Rene. That was that's given us lots and lots to think about there in terms of transitioning from paper-based documentation, establishing a golden current truth, and successfully achieving digitized compliance. If I could ask the two panelists to turn their cameras back on. We have around 15 minutes or so to take some questions, and we've had quite a few questions through. I think the first one I want to say is about it's in response to Jan's stuff about the information value chain, but I think it's good for both of you, and that's how can we be sure of the data quality? What can be done to have to give greater assurance of data to support that chain? And I was, I sort of linked to that was a question I was going to ask about how you sort of get agreement amongst various stakeholders on which information has a value. So there's quite a lot there, but it's kind of like how do the different stakeholders get that assurance of data quality? How can you get a great agreement of what has value? I don't know who wants to take that first. Rene, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So data quality is, I mean, as far as the way the information is structured and can be audited, I mean, that's fairly simple. That comes into the naming protocols and just having a clear and visible strategy. You know, just do an organigram to say, well, this is, you know, the building safety case has got different sections for structure, fire, residence. You know, just having that clear and how it is grouped and categorized as a start. What's in that information, that's obviously reliant on the people you are using. And obviously the principal accountable, person he's gonna rely on the people he's bringing in to do that. So that's just a process of choosing quality consultants that know what they're doing. I think the regulator, they will have, I've seen they have people on board that it will scrutinize. So I think it will push standards of what we include. And then hopefully at some point we'll have a checklist to say, on this drawing, you have this, which we don't have. We don't have a standard for that, I think. So,
Jan, did you want to come in on that as well?
Yeah, I suppose what I would say is it comes down to version control is one thing. So making sure that if someone types in the piece and timing, so I suppose the person who first enters the data in will get logged, and effectively it will say Jan entered that data today, 11:48. And then let's say Rene goes in and changes that tomorrow, then it will be updated by Rene and it will update all the information to say, well, actually on the log, Rene updated that piece of information. And then the second part, which gives you a bit of assurance, is going to be a status to say this is signed off. This is, and again, I would go back to ISO standards, but I would go with status codes to say this has been submitted for approval, and then it gets approved, and then suddenly you go, okay, I can rely on this piece of information. It's been signed off by the team. We're happy with it. So, a bit of a combination of things, really, but. I suppose that would be my answer.
Thanks, Jan. That's great. I'm going to go to a question from a guy called Mark, who's from Telereal Trillium. He's a project manager, and he's asked quite a broad question, but I think it's worth taking. So he said, "How prepared do you think the industry is to fully implement the golden thread?" All of this is a big journey, isn't it? It's kind of transitioning from paper-based documentation to these digital tools. Where do you think we are on this journey when it comes to the golden thread at the moment, and what is preventing us from getting there more quickly, I suppose? Jan, do you want to take that?
Yeah. How prepared are we? I guess I'd say everyone's got work to do to make it better, but I don't think whilst there's a minimum standard, I don't necessarily think the minimum standard is to make it, for instance, secure, digital, and consistent. Could just be getting a platform in place which stores and manages, basically a document management system, and that may be, for most people, that might be enough for a golden thread. But how many people are actually following that effectively? I think that's another story. I suppose you can put in place all sorts of plans, but people have got to follow them.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd say is the golden thread I think it will evolve in terms of what both were expect. Like if you look at, I can't remember, there's codes for housing. It used to be that, like, I think it's code 5 house. I can't remember, but
regulatory requirements will be updated over time.
And it'll be a moving goalpost, I think, eventually, as everyone gets more accustomed to what's expected of them. It's and at the minute we haven't seen what good looks like. I think that lack of clarity probably isn't necessarily helpful to people, but equally it opens the door to innovation, I guess, and pushing the limit. So.
Okay, Rene, do you have anything to add on
that? I think we've got the tools there. We've got the BIM's been around for a long time. I think we need to really start on bridging the gap between the construction people and the people who's running these buildings, because for them this is going to be a challenge as well. And I think Jan's right. There's no good example yet, and look, it will come out, and I'm sure there will be preferred approaches that will be published. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question. I suppose this question is about sort of future proofing, really. So Will Gage, our Building Passport, wants to know. He's saying he's pointed out that given there may be multiple handover requirements through a building's lifespan, how do you cater for when new users have differing file structures and data management strategies? Would it be useful to store the data against the asset rather than a user stakeholder for the whole lifespan of the building in a common data environment? So I don't know who wants to take that, Rene.
Yeah. So definitely. So we've looked at different approaches how to do this. So obviously, if you just do folder structure, it really relies on grouping and the naming. The other approach is if it's object-based, so it is linked to an object or a system or a room or an area, because then all you have to do is link specific pieces of information to that. So I think that is the easiest, but obviously it relies on that platform. So let's say that platform's not around, you still need a structure of information in the background. I've seen the 360 photo approach where it's tagging, a photo, an object, and then you link information to it. But again, let's say you changed the fit out of that room, or you've changed something, then you've got to go and redo that photo first of all, and potentially re-tagging and things. So I think object-based seems to be logical, but again, it's still we're now getting to a point where people need to consider, if I do something, I'm going to do it virtually and update it and then translate it through. So that's not something the facilities people would have had to do before. They would just update a data pack.
Jan, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I suppose mine would be store once, present as many times as you like through association. So you could have different types of hierarchy of data. And then you basically, like Rene says, really, you tag it to the right structure, which then presents it for the right purpose that you're looking for. So rather than having a one data structure that fits all, I don't think that'll ever work. You've got different purposes, so you should store it once and then present it as many times as you need to in different formats. Doesn't matter how many times you present it or surface it.
There's a question that I'll just take briefly. Thanks for that, Jan. Which is because it comes on to kind of what you were just saying. But somebody wants to know is how you avoid data silos across the project to ensure that the record is correct from a building safety perspective. Does there need to be one person or firm that needs to be responsible for all the data? Because you can imagine there's going to be a sheer amount of data flying around, I would imagine. So how do you stop it from being siloed and leading to inaccuracies and that kind of thing? Rene, do you want to?
Yeah. So that's partly why we've put our service approach in that way. So we oversee the whole thing, because you can have a fire consultant, structure engineer. They're all going to do their reports, and some of it will point to the structure engineers. It's all interconnected. So what we're trying to do is create a overall structure where the pieces of information or sections will go into, and then overview, see if there's overlaps or anything. Because you're right, because if there's an overlap, someone changes their strategy and then it null and voids something on the other side. I think that's probably where the principal accountable person will become this unique individual who will be able to oversee this. The typical approach is it's a 40-page fire strategy, it's a 30-page structures analysis, and then it's bunched into a folder. So I think that's where digital will really play a role, is if you can break up that pieces of information into paragraphs or categories, and it's got a metadata or a link to further information. But again, it's going to be clever, potentially clever digital information platforms to help with that.
Do you want to come in on that one, Jan, or shall I?
I'll just say, don't. The idea is that any digital strategy needs to break the silo and share data. But how you do that is kind of up to you, really.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a couple of minutes left. I want to take a question about AI. So James Everett from Swagger Building Control, he's asking, do you have a view on AI in construction control and 3D scanning to produce as built records? Do either of you have a view on that?
I suppose mine at the moment would be I would not necessarily trust it without lots and lots and lots of testing. Like when someone's got to put their name against something and you've got to sign it off, you've got to have real confidence in what you're doing with that piece of software. And I would personally not be comfortable doing that without my own. If I wouldn't want AI to make a decision on my behalf.
No,
I suppose.
I mean, presumably that you may be able to trust it in the future if it becomes established.
I suppose it depends on the purpose, doesn't it? Again, if they're asking me to sign off everything, then no. But if I'm asking it to check if a certificate's in date, well, that might be okay.
AI is such a big umbrella term as well, isn't it? So it's Rani, do you want to come in on that?
I think AI to organize or find information, again, I've seen platforms that can actually read certain information and find keywords to help group it. So I think that's powerful, especially if you've got a database of existing information. I've seen AI that recognize or can analyze photos. So we partnered up with a survey company who will take photos in the ceiling and then it runs a AI. Okay, obviously, you can look at the photos yourself and see, well, there's no fire stopping in there or anything, but they have actually trained the AI to look for that and highlight that. So, these kind of things, again, AI needs rules and boundaries that we give it to use. So I think there's potential. And then obviously 3D scanning, great, or 3D photos. You can, if you, let's say you have a regular scan of your building and add that to your record, why not? Those things are available.
Okay, thanks, Rennie. I think that's all we've got time for. It's gone really quickly. It's a fantastic discussion. So thank you to both of you. This session is going to be available on demand in about, it normally takes half an hour or so, I think, for it to be uploaded, and then it will be available to download. We have another Digital Building Week session at 2:00, which is on achieving the golden thread. So if you enjoyed this, there'll be another session later this afternoon. But the only thing left to do is to thank Renee and Jan, and that's all from us. Thank you.